Welcome back everybody to another MOTOBOB video, and very recently BMW announced a massive update to their middleweight adventure bike in the form of the brand new 2024 F900GS. And this is a huge change and it does make this bike look a lot more competitive, but is it good enough to compete with what I think, and I think a lot of people think, is the best middleweight currently on the market, the KTM 890 Adventure? Well, in this video we'll go through all of the details of each bike in all of the major review categories to see how they stack up ahead of being able to ride the GS when it's launched later this year. Perhaps the most significant update for the F900GS is the engine. Previously the F850GS looked a little bit underpowered versus the competition, and so they've swapped it out for a larger capacity parallel twin that you'll also find in the F900R Naked and the F900XR Sports Tourer. Now, BMW claim as a result there's a handy boost in torque across the entire rev range, which should make it feel more gutsy and satisfying to ride. But also, at the top end, there's 10 more horsepower peak, taking it from 95 to 105 at 8,500 RPM. That, in theory, makes the two engines actually quite similar. They're both parallel twins, they're both just shy of 900cc, they both get a cross-plane crank for a little bit more of that V-twin sound and feel, and they also both make 105 horsepower peak exactly. But the thing is, I'm going to have to reserve judgment on this one until we're actually able to ride the BMW, because in the past, I can't say I've been massively in love with this 900 engine. I tested the F900R Naked a little while back, and while it does look good on paper and like it should make for some decent fun, it just felt a little bit flat and underwhelming. The KTM, on the other hand, well, it gets a good chunk more peak torque, so the BMW's 93 and the KTM is 100 Newton meters, but also they do such a great job of giving their bikes that very direct throttle response, which makes them an absolute blast to ride every time you go out on them. Another big advantage of the KTM is that the fuel capacity is substantially larger. Fuel consumption on these two bikes is pretty similar, as you'd expect for such similar engine layouts, but the KTM gets their signature low-slung fuel tank design that hangs down either side of the bike, and while it does help with handling, giving it a low center of gravity, it also brings the benefit of holding a lot more fuel. Now, their official spec sheet figures say 20 litres of capacity and also 4.5 litres consumed per 100 kilometers ridden, and so that translates to around 444 kilometers of range or 275 miles. It is worth adding though that these official consumption figures do tend to be very favourable to the bike across all manufacturers, and so you'd have to ride pretty steadily to get that much range out of it. BMW with this F900GS have sought to save a lot of weight, and one of the things they've done is redesign the fuel tank with a new plastic construction as opposed to the steel of the previous gen. Now, this change alone saved 4.5 kilograms, which is really quite substantial for a single component, but the downside with a new slimmer shape, which is said to be more ergonomic, is that they've had to sacrifice half a litre of capacity, so this new bike is 14.5 litres as opposed to the 15 of the previous gen 850. So as you'd expect, the range looks pretty limited versus the KTM. At the official consumption figures, you're looking at 329 kilometers or 204 miles. Now look, if you're considering these bikes purely for the sort of on-off-road blend and you might want to take it trail riding fairly locally, then 14.5 litres might still be enough. But if you're looking at these bikes as a middleweight adventure tourer, something that you can do decent distance on in comfort between fill-ups, then clearly the KTM is going to look slightly more tempting. The other huge benefit of that low-slung fuel tank design is that it does keep the center of gravity very low on this bike, and that means that it really doesn't feel top-heavy in the way that some other adventure bikes can. Lots of fuel up high, combined with the tall stance and therefore a generally tall seat height. You know, a lot of these bikes can feel a little challenging for some riders who perhaps don't feel that experienced off-road and even at low speeds on the road. But for me, that's the beauty of the KTM. It does flatter the rider and it helps to build your confidence, because it feels like those panic moments where the bike feels like it's going to tip over are fewer and further between than other middleweight adventure bikes. The rest of these bikes looks pretty similar though in terms of chassis spec. They both get tubeless spoked oversized wheels with a good choice of off-road bias tires. Braking looks decent enough on both bikes, and the suspension has been improved on the BMW with full adjustability now, so just like the KTM. And while the GS does sit a little bit taller with 230mm of travel on the fork as opposed to 200 on the KTM. They're really not a million miles apart, and so I truly believe it'll be down to weight distribution where the KTM is so good. Plus you've got the fact that it's still, despite the weight loss on the BMW, the lighter of the two. It's 210 kilograms wet, and that's including all that fuel versus the 219 kilograms of the BM. Ergonomically, BMW have put a lot of work into making the F900GS more of a credible off-road proposition. With a whole bunch of tweaks like a new handlebar position, you've got that narrower shape to the fuel tank as well. Enduro foot pegs are now as standard and the foot controls are adjustable too, all of which ought to make it feel much more natural in the standing position. As for the seat height, well, it's pretty tall at 870mm as standard. I think this is to be expected with a bike of 230mm of travel on the suspension, but the good news for shorter riders or perhaps anyone who's not that serious about off-roading is that there's a whole range of different seats and suspension kits, which means it's possible to get this bike right down to 815mm or up as high as 890. Now the KTM gets an adjustable seat as standard, and that goes between 840 and 860mm, and again you've got some other options in the accessories catalogue. This bike is similarly good off-road with a naturally slender tank because of that low design, and also it's got a good bar and peg position, and it's a really comfortable bike both on-road and off. I think truly only a demo ride for each rider will tell you whether it fits like a glove, because this is almost always a personal thing, but on paper and given that there's a range of seat heights available, this category looks pretty much even. Blow for blow in the electronics category, these bikes again are pretty similar. They both get a TFT display, there's plenty of riding modes and rider aids to customize, and there's also the option of phone connectivity so you can get calls and music and navigation right there on the dash. But generally I'd say the BMW TFT displays are really nicely designed, probably the better of the two, and it helps to make them feel super easy to use. So I'm really looking forward to riding this one, and I think it will be a competitive advantage. Plus, you've got the fact that there are a couple of other features in the accessories catalogue that the KTM doesn't get, like the keyless ignition or their integrated SOS button, and so that probably does give the BMW the edge in terms of technical comprehensiveness, providing that you've got the extra budget to spec those features up. Certainly, BMW have made some big strides forward with this new middleweight GS. There's more power, less weight, an ergonomic overhaul as well. But the thing is, image really does help to sell bikes, and so I'd expect this new styling to really help quite a lot in the showroom. They've massively slimmed down the tail section, which does make it look far more lean and aggressive. They've also ditched the asymmetrical headlight design for a single central unit, which I think is a big improvement at the front end. And then also you've got this Sao Paulo yellow paint job, which to me looks pretty awesome. As for the KTM, well, the looks have always been a little bit of a challenge for me. They have made some big improvements for 2023 with the new fairing design, which does make the whole bike look a little more connected. But I think the sort of technical advantage of that low-slung fuel tank is slightly to the detriment of the way the bike looks. It doesn't have that hunched up, tall, aggressive adventure bike stance, but more so one that does look like it does carry its weight low. So for me, the KTM's a little bit more function over form, which is totally fine if you're of that mindset. But the BMW just gets a bit more of that trendy rally style, and some of the technical changes they've made, like the slim subframe, have actually enhanced the aesthetics. On price, they're almost exactly the same in their standard form, so the 890 Adventure starts at £11,999, whereas the BMW does manage to undercut it, but only by £4, so that one's £11,995. Obviously, if you get stuck into the accessories catalogue for each of these bikes, then it's gonna start to push the price up quite considerably. You've got all sorts of packs and enhancements available, but in their most basic forms, this one is pretty much even, and I don't expect that that was an accident, because BMW will have been keen to hit a competitive price point with the KTM. So look, the BMW has been massively improved, but there are still some key strengths like the snappiness of the engine and the excellent weight distribution that really do make the 890 Adventure fundamentally very difficult to beat. I'm still looking forward to riding the GS though, because sometimes bikes add up to being greater than the sum of their specs, and so I'll be looking to get hold of one as soon as possible when bikes come to the UK. Do hit subscribe if you've not already to see that review as soon as it goes live, and in the meantime, I'd love to know which bike you'd pick, so do let me know down in the comments below. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next one.